The flames were already 30 feet high when I pulled into my driveway that night. Orange light danced across Sheriff Karen's face as she stood watching my neighbor's house burn. She turned to me with that same cold smirk she had worn for months. "Shame about the fire," she said, adjusting her badge. "Old wiring, I suppose." But I knew the truth, and in that moment, staring at the destruction she had caused, I realized that everything I thought I knew about justice was about to change forever. For 37 years, the lake was my sanctuary. Every morning at sunrise, I would walk the same gravel path from my property down to the water's edge. The old access road had been there longer than I had been alive. My grandfather used it. My father used it. Now it was my turn to carry on the tradition. The lake stretched out like glass most mornings. Mist would rise from the surface while loons called to each other across the water. I had built my dock with my own hands 20 years ago, replacing the weathered planks piece by piece as time demanded. This was not just property to me. This was home. My neighbors were good people. Tom and Martha lived in the blue house closest to the main road. They had been coming to the lake every summer for 40 years. Down the shore was the Henderson family, 3 generations of them gathering every 4th of July for their famous fish fry. We all knew each other. We looked out for each other. We respected the quiet peace that drew us all to this place. The access road was nothing fancy, just packed dirt and gravel that wound through the trees for maybe a quarter-mile. It connected all our properties to the county road without forcing us to trespass on anyone else's land. The county had maintained it for decades. There had never been any disputes, never any problems, never any reason to think that would change. I spent my retirement years fishing from that dock, reading books in the shade of the old oak tree that leaned out over the water. Sometimes I would just sit there and listen to the silence. After 40 years of working construction in the city, that silence was worth more than gold to me. My daughter Sarah would bring the grandchildren out every few weekends. They loved feeding the ducks and skipping stones across the calm water. I taught my grandson how to tie fishing knots on that same dock where my father had taught me. These were the moments that made life worth living. But I should have known that peace like that never lasts forever. I should have paid more attention to the changes happening in our little county. New people were moving in. New people with new ideas about how things should be run. New people who did not understand that some things were better left alone. The first sign of trouble came in the form of fresh gravel on our access road. Someone had spent money to improve it without asking any of us. Tom mentioned it first at our weekly coffee gathering at Martha's kitchen table. "Seems like overkill," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "Road was fine the way it was." We all agreed, but none of us thought much of it at the time. The county probably had some extra budget to spend. Maybe they were just being nice for once. We were grateful for small improvements. We had no idea that someone was already planning to take it all away from us. I first met Sheriff Karen on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was carrying my fishing gear down the access road when I heard a car engine behind me. The sound was too loud and too aggressive for our quiet little road. I stepped aside to let whoever it was pass by. The patrol car stopped right next to me. The window rolled down, and I found myself looking at a woman I had never seen before. She was maybe 50 years old with short gray hair and the kind of hard expression that suggested she did not smile very often. The name tag on her uniform read K-Morrison. "You cannot be here," she said without any introduction. I blinked confused. "Excuse me. This is a restricted access road. You are trespassing." I set down my tackle box and tried to keep my voice calm. "Ma'am, I think there has been some mistake. I have been using this road for almost 40 years. My property backs up to the lake. This is the legal access that connects to the county road." She got out of her car. Karen was a big woman, probably 6 feet tall, and she used every inch of her height to intimidate. She walked over to me with her hand resting on her gun belt. "I am Sheriff Morrison," she said, "and I am telling you that this road is now restricted. County Ordinance 247C, you can look it up." I had never heard of any County Ordinance 247C. I had lived here for decades and attended county meetings when issues affected our area. No one had ever mentioned restricting our access road. "Sheriff, with all due respect, can you show me the documentation for this ordinance? I would like to understand what has changed and why." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you questioning my authority?" "No, ma'am. I am just trying to understand the situation. This access road serves 6 different property owners. We all have legal easement rights that go back generations. My deed specifically mentions this access." Karen stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the coffee on her breath and see the anger building in her face. "Your deed does not matter anymore. The county has determined that this road poses safety and environmental concerns. It is closed to private use effective immediately." I pulled out my phone to take a picture of her patrol car and badge number. I wanted to document this conversation in case I needed to file a complaint later. "Do not point that camera at me," she snapped. "This is a public road, Sheriff. I have the right to document our interaction." She grabbed for my phone, but I pulled it back quickly. "You are interfering with an official investigation." "What investigation? I am just trying to access my own property to go fishing." Karen walked back to her patrol car and grabbed something from the front seat. When she returned, she was holding a citation book. "Trespassing on restricted county property, interfering with a police officer, failure to comply with lawful orders." She was writing as she spoke. "That will be $350 in fines plus court costs." I stared at the citation she handed me. My hands were shaking slightly as I read the charges. None of this made any sense. I had been walking on this road every week for 40 years. Now suddenly I was a criminal. "This is not right," I said quietly. Karen smiled for the first time since I had met her. It was not a friendly smile. "Welcome to the new reality," she said. "I suggest you find another way to access your property. Or better yet, maybe it is time to consider selling and moving somewhere more suitable for someone your age." She got back in her patrol car and drove away, leaving me standing alone on the road with a citation in my hand, and a growing sense that my peaceful life by the lake was about to become much more complicated. The citations came every week after that, sometimes twice a week. I tried different approaches to reach the lake. I tried walking through the woods along the property line. Karen was waiting there with another ticket. I tried driving my truck on what I thought was the county right-of way. She had it towed and impounded. "Illegal parking on county property," she explained as the tow truck hauled away my vehicle. "That will be $200 in fines plus towing and storage fees." Each encounter was worse than the last. Karen seemed to take personal pleasure in making my life difficult. She would sit in her patrol car at the end of the access road for hours, just waiting for me or any of my neighbors to show up. Tom tried to reason with her one morning. He brought copies of all his property documents, including the original deed from 1987 that clearly showed the easement rights. "Sheriff, surely we can work something out," he said, spreading the papers on the hood of her car. "These documents prove that we have legal access. This has been settled law for decades." Karen swept the papers off her car without looking at them. I do not care what your old papers say. The county has new priorities now. This lake area is being rezoned for environmental protection. Your access interferes with wildlife migration patterns. That was the first time she mentioned environmental protection. It was also the first time any of us had heard about rezoning. When Tom asked for details about the environmental study, Karen told him he could file a Freedom of Information request and wait for a response. Martha got a citation that same week for disturbing the peace because her grandchildren were playing too loudly near the water. The Henderson family was cited for illegal camping because they had set up their annual family reunion picnic. I started keeping track of all the citations Karen was issuing. In 6 weeks, she had written over 40 tickets to the 6 families who used the lake access. The fines totaled more than $8,000. None of us could afford to keep paying, but we also could not afford the legal fees to fight the charges in court. That was when I started noticing the survey stakes. Someone had been walking through our properties while we were dealing with Karen's harassment. Little orange flags marked trees and property corners throughout the area. Professional survey equipment had been set up near the lake shore. When I asked the survey crew who had hired them, they told me to contact Pinnacle Development Company. I had never heard of Pinnacle Development. A quick internet search showed that they specialized in luxury lakefront resort properties. Their website featured pictures of exclusive vacation homes and private marinas, the kind of development that would require buying out all the existing property owners. The pieces were starting to come together. Karen was not enforcing environmental protection. She was clearing the area for developers. Every citation, every harassment charge, every restriction was designed to make our lives so miserable that we would eventually give up and sell our properties. I called the county commissioner's office to file a complaint about Karen's behavior. The receptionist told me that Sheriff Morrison was implementing new policies to protect county resources, and that any complaints should be filed in writing through the proper channels. I filed a written complaint. 2 weeks later, I received a form letter stating that my complaint had been reviewed and found to be without merit. The letter was signed by someone I had never heard of in the county administration office. Meanwhile, Karen escalated her tactics. She started showing up at our homes during dinner time. She would sit in her patrol car in our driveways with the engine running and the spotlight pointed at our windows. When we came outside to ask what she wanted, she would claim she was conducting surveillance for suspicious activity in the area. The final straw came when she had my grandson arrested. Kyle was 17 years old and visiting for the weekend. He rode his bicycle down the access road to meet me at the dock. Karen was waiting for him. She claimed he was operating an unlicensed vehicle on restricted county property and trespassing with intent to commit vandalism. She handcuffed my grandson and threw him in the back seat of her patrol car while I watched from my dock. The charges were dropped the next day, but the damage was done. Sarah called me that night, furious and terrified. "Dad, you have to stop this," she said through tears. "I cannot have my children around this anymore. That woman is dangerous." I realized then that Karen had won. She had made it impossible for my family to enjoy the lake. She had turned our peaceful retreat into a source of stress and fear. She had used her badge and her authority to terrorize decent people who had done nothing wrong. But she had also made a mistake. She had pushed too far, and now I was angry enough to push back. I spent the next week in the county courthouse basement, digging through public records. Every property transaction, every zoning change, every county contract from the past 2 years. I was looking for connections between Sheriff Karen Morrison and Pinnacle Development Company. The courthouse clerks thought I was writing a book about local history. They were happy to help me navigate the filing systems and point me toward the records I needed. What I found was more disturbing than I had expected. Karen had been hired as sheriff 8 months ago. Her previous job was as security director for a property management company in the next county over. That company had been acquired by Pinnacle Development just 6 months before Karen got the sheriff position. The timeline was suspicious, but I needed more evidence. I started researching Karen's background more thoroughly. Public records showed that she had left her previous law enforcement job under investigation for administrative irregularities. The details were sealed, but the pattern was clear. I found similar situations in 2 other counties where Pinnacle Development had acquired lakefront properties. In each case, there had been sudden changes in local law enforcement priorities, new restrictions on property access, increased harassment of long-time residents, and eventually, most of the affected families had sold their properties well below market value. Tom agreed to help me document Karen's behavior. We set up a camera system that recorded the access road 24 hours a day. Within a week, we had footage of Karen conducting what she called patrols, but what looked more like stalking and intimidation. Martha started keeping a detailed log of every interaction with Karen: dates, times, witnesses, and exact quotes of what was said. Her background as a retired school secretary made her excellent at documentation. She recorded conversations on her phone whenever possible. The Henderson family contributed financial records showing the impact of Karen's citations on their family budget. 3 generations of them had been saving money for years to maintain their lake property. Now they were spending those savings on legal fees and fines instead of dock repairs and family gatherings. We were building a case, but we needed someone in authority to listen to us. The county commissioners had already dismissed my complaints. The state police referred me back to local jurisdiction. Karen had effectively isolated us from any oversight or accountability. That was when I remembered reading about a state attorney general's office hotline for reporting corruption in local government. I called the number and spoke with an investigator named Janet Walsh. "What you are describing sounds like a pattern we have seen before," she told me during our first phone conversation. "Do you have any documentation to support your claims?" I sent her everything we had collected: videos, audio recordings, financial records, property documents, and a timeline showing the correlation between Karen's harassment and Pinnacle Development's interest in our area. Janet called me back 3 days later. "We are opening a preliminary investigation," she said, "but I need you to understand that this process takes time, months, possibly longer. Can you continue documenting everything while maintaining your own safety?" I assured her that we would continue collecting evidence, but I was also worried about what Karen might do if she discovered that we were investigating her. She had already shown that she was willing to arrest teenagers and harass elderly residents. What would she do to people who threatened her arrangement with the development company? My answer came sooner than I expected. Karen started conducting what she called welfare checks on all the lake residents. She would show up at our homes at random times, claiming she had received anonymous reports of suspicious activity or concerns about elderly residents living alone. These welfare checks were clearly intimidation tactics. She would search through our property, looking for any code violations or safety issues she could use to issue more citations. She brought other deputies with her, making each visit feel like a raid rather than a welfare check. During one of these visits, I noticed Karen taking pictures of my car license plate, my home security system, and the camera equipment Tom and I had set up to monitor the access road. She was gathering intelligence on us. She knew we were watching her, and now she was watching us back. The situation was escalating beyond harassment into something that felt much more dangerous. Janet Walsh came to visit me 3 weeks later. She drove an unmarked sedan and met me at a diner 20 miles from the lake. She wanted to see our evidence in person and discuss strategy for the investigation. "What you have collected is impressive," she said, reviewing the folders I had brought. "This shows a clear pattern of abuse of authority, but we need more than pattern evidence. We need proof of criminal activity." She explained that harassment and intimidation were difficult to prosecute unless we could prove criminal intent. What we really needed was evidence of financial corruption or conspiracy between Karen and the development company. "Can you get access to her financial records?" Janet asked. I told her that would be impossible without a warrant, but I had been thinking about other approaches. Karen was spending a lot of time in our area, much more than normal patrol duties would require. Her department was small, and she was neglecting other responsibilities to focus on harassing us. "What if we documented the time she spends here versus her official duties elsewhere in the county?" I suggested. Janet nodded. "That could show misuse of county resources. Keep tracking her patrol patterns. Also, see if you can find out who is paying for the survey work and property assessments in your area." I spent the next month conducting surveillance on Karen while she was conducting surveillance on us. I would park at different locations around the county and document her activities throughout the day. The pattern was shocking. Karen was spending 6 to 8 hours per day in our lake area. Meanwhile, response times for emergency calls in other parts of the county had increased dramatically. I obtained records showing that domestic violence calls were taking twice as long to get responses. Break-ins and theft reports were being ignored for days. The county was paying Karen to protect all residents, but she was using county resources to serve the interests of a private development company. That was a clear violation of her oath of office and potentially criminal misuse of public funds. Tom made contact with one of the survey crews working near the lake. After buying them lunch and several beers, he learned that Pinnacle Development was paying for comprehensive environmental and geological assessments of all the lakefront properties. "They are planning something big," the surveyor told Tom. "Maybe 50 or 60 luxury units, boat slips, private beach, the whole 9 yards, but they need to acquire all the existing properties first." Martha discovered that several similar projects in neighboring counties had been delayed or canceled due to environmental protection lawsuits. Pinnacle's strategy appeared to be buying out existing residents before any organized opposition could develop. Karen's job was to make life so difficult for us that we would sell quickly and cheaply. She was being paid by the county, but she was working for the developers. That was the criminal conspiracy Janet needed to build a case. I also started researching the county officials who had hired Karen. The decision to bring her in as sheriff had been made by a 3-person committee consisting of 2 county commissioners and the county administrator. One of those commissioners, Robert Hayes, had received significant campaign contributions from companies connected to Pinnacle Development. The county administrator, Patricia Vance, had approved several zoning variances for other Pinnacle projects over the past 2 years. The corruption extended beyond Karen. She was just the enforcement mechanism for a broader conspiracy involving county officials and private developers. They were using public authority and taxpayer resources to enrich themselves at the expense of longtime residents. Janet was excited when I shared this information with her. "Now we have something we can prosecute," she said. "Conspiracy, corruption, misuse of public funds, and civil rights violations. This is going to be a significant case." But she also warned me that the investigation would take several more months to complete. In the meantime, I needed to be careful about my own safety. "People who engage in this level of corruption will not hesitate to escalate if they feel threatened," she told me. "Document everything, but do not take any unnecessary risks." Her warning turned out to be prophetic. 2 days after our meeting, someone broke into my house while I was visiting my daughter in the city. Nothing was stolen, but my files had been searched and my computer had been tampered with. Karen was no longer just harassing us. She was now actively trying to sabotage our investigation. The situation had become dangerous, but we were too close to the truth to give up now. The next phase of our plan would force her to show her hand completely, and when she did, we would be ready to document everything. The county commissioners' meeting was scheduled for the second Tuesday of November. I had requested time on the agenda to address concerns about law enforcement priorities in the Lake District. Commissioner Hayes tried to limit me to 3 minutes, but I had prepared for that. Tom, Martha, and the Henderson family all requested individual speaking slots on the same topic. Combined, we would have 15 minutes to present our case to the commissioners and the public. Janet Walsh could not attend the meeting officially, but she sat in the back row as an observer. She had advised me to focus on facts and documentation rather than emotional appeals. "Let the evidence speak for itself," she had said. The meeting room was more crowded than usual. Word had spread through the community about our situation with Karen. Other residents who had experienced similar harassment came to show support. Local newspaper reporters were present, along with someone from the regional television station. Karen was there too, sitting in the front row in full uniform. She had brought 2 of her deputies with her. They were trying to intimidate us, but their presence actually helped our case. It demonstrated the misuse of county resources we had been documenting. Commissioner Hayes called the meeting to order and tried to rush through the preliminary business. But when it came time for public comments, I stood up with my folder full of evidence. "Commissioners, I am here today to report serious misconduct by Sheriff Morrison and to request immediate investigation into corruption involving county officials and private developers." Karen started to stand up, but Commissioner Davis motioned for her to remain seated. I presented our timeline showing the correlation between Karen's harassment campaign and Pinnacle Development's interest in lake properties. I showed the financial records proving that county resources were being misused. I played audio recordings of Karen making threats and issuing illegal citations. "Sheriff Morrison has issued over 60 citations to 6 families in the past 4 months," I continued. "Every single citation has been related to accessing our own properties via a road that has been in continuous public use for over 50 years. Meanwhile, emergency response times in other parts of the county have doubled." Martha spoke next, presenting her detailed logs of Karen's intimidation tactics. She described the arrest of my grandson and the harassment of her grandchildren. Her voice was steady and professional, but the emotion was clear. Tom presented the survey evidence and the connections to Pinnacle Development. He had prepared maps showing exactly which properties were being targeted and how the development project would benefit from forced sales. Finally, the Henderson family patriarch, Robert Henderson, stood to speak. He was 83 years old and had been coming to the lake since he was a child. "My family has been part of this community for 4 generations," he said quietly. "We have paid our taxes, followed the law, and been good neighbors. Sheriff Morrison has made it impossible for us to enjoy the property that has been in our family for 60 years. This is not law enforcement. This is theft." The room was completely silent when he finished speaking. Then Commissioner Davis asked Karen to respond to our allegations. Karen stood up, clearly angry but trying to maintain professional composure. "These residents are mischaracterizing routine law enforcement activities," she began. "The lake area has been identified as environmentally sensitive, and new restrictions are necessary to protect county resources. Can you provide documentation of these environmental concerns?" Commissioner Davis asked. Karen hesitated. "The studies are still in progress." "What about the 60 citations that have been issued? Can you explain the legal basis for restricting access to private property?" County Ordinance 247C clearly states. "There is no County Ordinance 247C, I interrupted, standing up. "I have searched every county record going back 20 years. You made that up." The room erupted in murmurs and gasps. Karen's face flushed red, and she looked toward Commissioner Hayes for support. But Hayes was staring at his notes, avoiding eye contact. Commissioner Davis called for order and then addressed Karen directly. "Sheriff Morrison, do you have any documentation to support your enforcement actions in the Lake District?" Karen stammered for several seconds before answering. "All of my actions have been within my authority as sheriff. These residents are trying to interfere with legitimate law enforcement." It was a weak response, and everyone in the room knew it. Commissioner Davis announced that the county would conduct a formal review of all enforcement actions in the Lake District. He also stated that all citations issued under the non-existent Ordinance 247C would be suspended pending the review. As the meeting ended, Janet Walsh caught my eye and nodded. We had accomplished exactly what we needed to. Karen's lies had been exposed in public, and the county was now forced to investigate her conduct. But Karen was not finished. As I walked to my car after the meeting, she approached me in the parking lot. "You have no idea what you have just started," she said quietly. "This is not over." I looked her directly in the eyes. "You are absolutely right. This is just the beginning." The state attorney general's office moved quickly after the public meeting. Janet Walsh called me the next morning to inform me that they were executing search warrants on Karen's office, her personal residence, and county administrative offices. "We found what we were looking for," she told me during a follow-up call that afternoon. "Financial records showing payments from Pinnacle Development to several county officials. Email communications discussing strategies to force property sales in the Lake District, and evidence that Sheriff Morrison was being paid consulting fees by a shell company connected to Pinnacle." Karen was arrested on Thursday morning. The charges included conspiracy, corruption, civil rights violations, and misuse of public funds. Commissioner Hayes and County Administrator Vance were arrested the same day on related charges. The local newspaper ran the story as front-page news. "County officials arrested in Lake property scheme" was the headline. The article detailed our 4-month investigation and the evidence we had collected. Karen's mugshot showed a woman who looked nothing like the intimidating figure who had terrorized us for months. She looked small and defeated. The smirk was gone, replaced by the expression of someone who finally understood that actions have consequences. The preliminary hearing was held 2 weeks later. Karen's attorney tried to argue that she had been acting within her authority as sheriff, but the evidence was overwhelming. Recorded threats, falsified citations, financial records showing kickbacks, and email communications planning the harassment campaign. Karen pleaded no contest to avoid a lengthy trial. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay restitution to all the families she had harassed. Her law enforcement certification was revoked permanently. Commissioner Hayes resigned in disgrace and was sentenced to 18 months for his role in the conspiracy. County Administrator Vance received 2 years and was ordered to pay significant fines. Pinnacle Development abandoned their lake project entirely. The negative publicity and legal costs made the development financially impossible. They sold their options on lake properties back to the original owners at cost. The county appointed an interim sheriff who immediately restored our access rights and dismissed all the citations Karen had issued. He also implemented new policies requiring oversight for any restrictions on property access and public notification for all zoning changes. Our legal fees were covered by a settlement with the county. The insurance company that handled the county's liability coverage determined that Karen's actions were so far outside proper law enforcement that they constituted criminal rather than civil misconduct. Tom and Martha decided to stay at the lake year-round instead of just summers. They said the experience had taught them how precious their peaceful life really was. The Henderson family held their largest reunion ever that Christmas, celebrating both the holidays and their victory over corruption. My grandson Kyle came back to visit the following spring. He rode his bicycle down the access road without fear, and we spent the afternoon fishing from the dock. He asked me about the experience and what I had learned from it. Sometimes doing the right thing is harder than doing nothing, I told him. But people who abuse their power only succeed when good people stay quiet. We could not stay quiet. The new sheriff, David Chen, was a 20-year veteran of law enforcement who believed in community policing. He stopped by the lake regularly, not to harass residents, but to check on our welfare and maintain positive relationships with the community. Law enforcement works best when police and citizens trust each other, he told me during one of our conversations. What happened here should never happen again. 1 year later, I was back to my morning routine, walking the gravel access road at sunrise, carrying my fishing gear down to the dock, listening to the loon's call across the still water. The peace had returned, but it felt different now, deeper, more meaningful because I understood how fragile it really was. The lake looked exactly the same as it had before Karen Morrison arrived. The same trees leaning over the water, the same ducks swimming near the shore, the same morning mist rising from the surface. But I was not the same person who had walked this path a year ago. I had learned that ordinary citizens have more power than they realize. When we organized, documented evidence, and demanded accountability, we were able to defeat corruption that seemed overwhelming. We proved that badges and authority mean nothing without integrity and respect for the law. The experience had taught me about civic responsibility. For 37 years, I had enjoyed the peace of this place without thinking much about the political processes that protected it. I had assumed that other people were handling those responsibilities. Karen's abuse showed me that assumption was dangerous. Now I attended every county commissioner's meeting. I stayed informed about zoning changes, budget decisions, and policy updates that might affect our community. I had become an advocate not just for lake residents, but for anyone who might face similar abuse of authority. Other communities reached out to me for advice when they encountered corrupt officials or suspicious development pressure. I shared our documentation methods, our investigation strategies, and most importantly, our experience that persistence and evidence could overcome even systematic corruption. Janet Walsh stayed in touch, updating me on other cases where our evidence had provided precedent for prosecution. Karen's conviction had made it easier to pursue similar corruption cases throughout the state. Our fight had protected not just our own lake access, but the rights of other citizens facing comparable abuse. The lake community was stronger than ever. We had learned to work together, trust each other, and stand up for shared values. Monthly potluck dinners brought all the families together to maintain the relationships we had built during the crisis. Tom had started a community newsletter that kept everyone informed about county politics and development proposals. Martha volunteered as secretary for a new Lake Residents Association that monitored government activities affecting our area. The Henderson family hosted an annual celebration of our victory, which had become a neighborhood tradition. Sheriff Chen became a trusted friend rather than a source of fear. He understood that effective law enforcement required community support and mutual respect. His officers were trained to de-escalate conflicts and solve problems rather than simply issue citations and make arrests. Sarah brought the grandchildren back to the lake regularly. They were old enough now to understand what had happened and why their grandfather had fought so hard to protect this place. Kyle, now 18, talked about studying law enforcement in college because he wanted to be the kind of police officer who protected people rather than intimidating them. On quiet mornings, I sometimes thought about Karen Morrison. She was serving her sentence in a minimum security facility about 200 miles away. I wondered if she understood the damage her corruption had caused, not just to our families, but to the reputation of law enforcement in general. I did not hate her anymore. Her punishment had been appropriate, and holding on to anger would not serve any useful purpose. But I would never forget the lesson her abuse had taught us about the importance of holding authority figures accountable. The sun was fully up now, burning away the morning mist and warming the wooden planks of my dock. I cast my fishing line into the calm water and settled in for a peaceful morning. The lake was still my sanctuary, but now it was also a symbol of what ordinary people could accomplish when they refused to accept injustice. Some battles are worth fighting, no matter how difficult they seem, and some victories are worth protecting for generations to come.